Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What's the scariest or most disturbing urban legend you heard?
When I was in a group home, we had these metal rooms called IMHF or something like that. I forgot what it stood for, but if you ever started to act up, you were thrown in there. Actually making us kids understand what we did wrong was above the staff's pay grade. These metal rooms were the one fix to every bad thing we did above backtalking. Due to me being autistic, you can imagine that I was put in this metal room a lot. I don't know how long this local tale inside the home has gone around. It may have been the week I got there or for many years. I've known kids who have been there far longer than me. Lily Red was a kid just like any of us, but was the most rotten and just overall cartoon levels of evil. After stabbing 2 staff with a knife, she snuck in. Most likely from school, as for some reason we went to public schooling instead of a school program at the home. She was to be detained and transferred to a mental hospital, but since none of the staff at the time had the proper training to do so, she was locked in the metal room. Hours went by, then days, then a whole week. Despite being fed and just about everything needed to stay alive, she passed away on the 7th day. Throughout all this time in the metal room, she never spoke a word. Although a pretty tame ghost story, as kids it scared the living shit out of us, so much so we would never say Red Lily, instead saying Maroon Rose as a funky alternate version of her name to not summon her. We believed if we somehow awoke her spirit, she would come after either one of us or maybe even all. Isolation today, or even hours, has a huge effect on your mental state. Thus, some of us would see her through breakdowns or other mental quirks. Imagine living in total stress, trying not to be put in the metal room and end up there anyway. A powerful magnet locks the door and you can't do anything to open it. Nothing but your reflections. And then your reflections stop becoming you.
My dad's side of the family are old-school, rugged hunter types, similar to the folk in the original film Red Dawn. They live on and own a large portion of a mountainside in the Catskills. Around 10 to 15 second cousins who live up there, with their parents too. Their houses line the road all the way up, and the land around the houses are mostly theirs as well, so it's very secluded once on their dirt road. They own all the houses at the top except for one, which sits between 2 of my cousins' houses, near the top, separated by only a small border of trees and a crude rock wall, about 50 feet away from the house on each side. The house sits at the end of a curved ascending driveway, upon a little grassy knoll, a small, single level, not counting basement. Creepy old cabin. Maple and oak trees are cast behind it like a curtain, as the mountain continues upward on a sharp, rocky incline. The largest tree overhangs the property, and from the tree hangs a worn-down old tire swing. The house can be seen clearly from the main road, at the start of the driveway. In fact, it's positioned in a way that almost feels as if it's actually watching over the driveway, like it's staring at you when you look in its direction. I don't know who lives there. I've never seen anyone enter or leave it. I've never seen a car there. I've never even seen a light on in a window. As far as I know, it's completely abandoned. What I do know is that there is a myth surrounding it. When me and my cousins were kids, our parents pulled us to the side and told us to never go on that property. And when we protested because, we'll say, come on, it had a damn tire swing, they warned us again and said, the mole men live there. When we asked them what that means, we were told that there were little men that lived in the house and in the holes on the mountainside behind it. Men no bigger than the size of your hand. They live in the ground and underneath the house, as their tunnels connect to their dark basement where they live. We were told that these masculine creatures don't tolerate trespassing, and that if they were to catch trespassers, and they have, they attack. With speed, faster than a rabbit, and teeth far sharper than a normal human's. Biting at their ankles and legs of their prey, climbing them and tearing at their flesh. Dragging whoever dare trespass on their land, either whole or in pieces, down into their holes, never to be seen again. Suffice to say, we never went on that property apart from one day in the fall, to play on the swing. We looked in the windows out of curiosity and saw that the inside was a normal room, but old. as if someone hadn't updated it in 50 years. Everything was covered in dust, but filled with stuff, like an old wooden table and silverware, as if someone had been living there but suddenly disappeared. While swinging on the tire, we eventually heard the leaves rustling in the woods behind us and promptly ran, never looking back. Kinda looked like pick-related. Tried my best to draw the layout. Long story short, this shit scared the shit out of me for a while, and I'll always remember it. We also have a 100-year-old woman who lives in the woods and lives off the land like an animal. She comes out of the woods and visits us once a year with deer, but that's for another story.
So there is some kind of cursed place in the city I live in. Some bad stuff happened near that place. A kid got hit by the old train there and survived. His nervous system was shit after that. Couldn't walk and was making noises and screaming all the time. Pretty close to that place, a house exploded. Well, a butane cylinder exploded, killing an old lady and her son. There was a traveling circus once and they showed animals and stuff. A guy tried to pet a tiger and got his arm bitten so bad that they had to remove it. A serial killer killed a married couple with a gun in that place. There is no legend of that place, nor stories or paranormal explanation to why bad stuff happens there from time to time. It just happens.
Pittsburgh has a few based purely on speculation, but one tale is truly unique and fascinating. This one is known as the Green Man. Born in 1918, a bright young boy, barely 8 years old, accepted a dare that would alter his life forever. Raymond Robinson and his friends would frequent the Morado Bridge to get to a popular swimming hole. Unbeknownst to them, the bridge was incredibly dangerous as it had live cable wires that allowed trolleys to cross at will. A child his same age died a year earlier climbing the pole. Robinson's friends spied a bird's nest atop a tree close to one of these very poles. Not one to back down from a challenge, Raymond climbed without hesitation. He touched the exposed wire, nearly reaching the top, and it sent 22,000 volts through his body. His right side was severely burned, and his eyes, nose, left ear, and most of his face was burned off. His friends called the police, and he was rushed to a nearby hospital in Beaver Falls. He was not expected to live past a year, but defied doctors' expectations. His facial features were all but gone, and he lost his left arm, and it was amputated. Regardless of the unfortunate event, Raymond kept up high spirits, hoping to return to his old life. Upon returning home, he learned of the cruelty of his fellow peers. Because he was blinded, could not comprehend the extent of his injuries. The children in his neighborhood were terrified of his appearance, and he was shunned. He spent the next many years inside doing brain teasers and hiking in the woods in his backyard and making handmade wares to sell for his family's finances. Decades later, he began taking long hikes on the highway that ran close to his home. With one foot on the pavement and a walking stick held in his one remaining arm, he proceeded to go on long journeys up and down the freeway. It did not take long for rumors to spread of a faceless figure emerging from the darkness, frightening passerbys. As interest peaked, many stopped to talk to him, often taking sympathy to plight. He began to capitalize on the encounters, asking for beer or cigarettes in exchange for a conversation or story which he told exceptionally well. Occasionally, there would be thrill-seekers and hecklers who would harass him and give him cigarettes laced with drugs. Despite this, Raymond was never deterred and kept his walks up for many years to come. Eventually, he allowed his picture to be taken for a price. He became known in the surrounding areas as the Green Man for undetermined reasons. Some say he often wore green shorts during the summer. Others say it was a jacket. Others argue it was his skin, which had a green tint from the burns which did not completely heal properly. During the late 50s and early 60s, his popularity was near legend in the area. As the years passed by, the next generation became bolder and would sometimes take Raymond on excursions to nearby Pittsburgh to bars and to astonish friends. Other times, young men would take their dates to see him in the hopes they would cling closer to them. It is not known what exactly transpired, but in 1982, Raymond was placed in the care of a nursing home. One rumor states that he was driven to a tunnel at least 50 miles from his home and beaten severely by teenagers, after which he spent the remainder of his life in a nursing home. Legend holds that his ghost still haunts this tunnel, waiting for bullies or hecklers to return to scare them off. It is said that if his ghost appears, he will touch your car, sending shockwaves through. Cars often stall and inexplicably die in this tunnel as well. The tunnel was eventually filled with salt to deny people entrance and closed.
My nowhere village in Flanders was home to a wealthy monastery during the Middle Ages, Pick-related, before Calvinists burnt it down in the 16th century. According to many elderly people I spoke to in my youth, it was common knowledge that the monks dug a tunnel system throughout the centuries to connect the many buildings they owned in the surrounding villages. These old people could even point to exact addresses where the tunnels surfaced, and I was told many of these houses are haunted. Stuff like footsteps, hearing hushed voices, and seeing candlelight illuminate walls. In the 19th, early 20th century, most of the tunnel entrances were walled off to keep the ghosts out, and no serious archaeological research has ever been carried out, save for a shallow and hasty dig at the old monastery's site in the 70s, before a residential area was built on top of it. Some people tried to go into the tunnels in search of a large treasure that was supposedly hidden there by the monks at the outbreak of the Reformation Wars, but they were either scared away not far into the tunnel, blocked by heavy metal doors, or simply disappeared into the darkness. Probably death by hypoxia from venturing into an underground tunnel closed off for centuries. By now, practically all of these haunted houses have been demolished to make way for new housing, and those elderly people from my youth have since long passed away. I fear the mystery of these haunted tunnels and a possible monastic treasure might never get cleared up.
This one's from my hometown, Molly's grave. The witch was chopped to pieces. Her butchered body parts were buried in separate graves, scattered through the wooded countryside. But beneath the shallow soil, the pieces are moving. Year by year, inch by inch, they draw closer together, crawling, wriggling, struggling to reassemble into the living corpse of Molly Crenshaw. From one generation to the next, teenagers throughout St. Charles County have passed down this homegrown urban legend about a supposed witch who died a century ago, but still haunts the local forests. The tale varies depending on the storyteller. According to most versions, Molly Crenshaw was a freed Jamaican slave who lived in western St. Charles County during the late 19th century. A voodoo practitioner, Molly was often called upon to dispense spells and potions for local townsfolk. One year, an unusually harsh winter decimated local crops. Villagers blamed Molly and her evil witchcraft. Pitchforks raised, they descended on her modest home. Molly defiantly confronted them, placing a curse on anyone who touched her. Unflinching, the mob attacked and killed her. Some say they cut her in half. Others say she was drawn and quartered. But every version of the tale ends with the townspeople burying the dismembered portions in separate graves.
Whoa, definitely sounds like something some ignorant and scared townsfolk would do in a panicked situation. It reminds me of a similar legend of two lovers killed by a roadside in my town. It is said that once they died by provenience, they were buried next to each other with only 2 rocks as gravestones. Each year, the stones leaned closer and closer to each other in a desperate attempt for the lovers to reconnect. They say if the stones ever touch, the world will end.
Growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, most scares here involved muggings and murders. But there is one place of historical significance that serves as a breeding ground for many paranormal stories: Fort McHenry, a military base built on a peninsula at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay during the late 1700s. Fort McHenry has seen a lot of action over the past couple centuries. The most well-known event being the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812, a 24-hour-long holdout against the British Royal Navy after they had just captured Washington, D.C. and practically burned it to the ground. Our national anthem was written about this battle by a man who had watched it unfold before his very eyes, on top of being the location of one of the most pivotal battles to ever take place on American soil. Fort McHenry has also served brief stints throughout history as a hospital and a prison. You would hear stories all the time about ghost sightings and strange occurrences over there. apparitions of 19th century soldiers patrolling along the fort's raised walls, grieving, twisted spirits of those who died in confinement or were executed within the fort's walls, sounds of distant artillery, and sudden wafts of sulfuric odor. I remember one story in particular about a hostile spirit that would frequent the women's restroom and would throw shit at people who had their backs turned. The National Park Service that looks over the place even took advantage of these stories by offering ghost tours at some point, parading people around the fort at night, telling the most popular ghost stories. I've been to Fort McHenry multiple times during the day, and I can't corroborate any of these stories myself, but that's usually how these things go.
South America Anon here. My family all live in small rural areas, so I've heard a ton of scary shit whenever I went to visit. I'll write down the ones I remember for now, some of which I posted before. Uncle's Town. When he was a kid, there was this guy who apparently went crazy one day, running all over town like he was trying to escape from something before going back home and dying of a reported heart attack. After that, his wife would dress in black and sit outside the entire day without saying a word until nightfall, where she would go back inside and neighbors would hear crying. It got so creepy people avoided going near that street, which was easy because it was the last house in a dead end. After a few months, she stopped leaving the house altogether and the crying moaning got louder, as well as sounds of things falling. Nobody really wanted to call the police for noise complaints to let the poor widow grieve in peace, even if it meant her thrashing the house every night. One night it got really bad, like she was tearing the place down at 2 a.m., and a neighbor called the cops over it. It was so bad, apparently even people from the other street went over to check what was going on. After no response, they decided to bust the door down and the noise immediately stopped. Dead silence. First floor was perfectly intact, nothing broken or out of place, very clean too. Same for the second floor. They head into the woman's room, and it's also perfectly intact, but she's dead, just laying on the bed with her hands on her body like in a coffin, zero wounds or signs of starvation or dehydration or anything else. Later, the autopsy didn't find anything wrong with her. No heart attack, diseases, stroke, poison, nothing. And that she had been dead for at least 2 weeks. Everyone in that dead-end street moved away because they said they could still hear it some nights, and it's been abandoned ever since. This one's a bit hazy, so it took me a while to remember and find an appropriate pick, sorry. Aunt's Town, other side of the family, not that uncle's wife. Absolutely shitty poor town with nothing going on. When she was a teenager, there was this crazy guy, probably schizophrenic, who had inherited this huge house in a farm from his parents, and he hated anyone talking to him other than the shops he bought food from. One day he shows up with this woman no one in town knew. Small town, everyone knows each other, so this stands out. He introduced her to the butcher and bought like twice the amount of meat he usually did. My aunt's family lived close to the butcher, and her grandma said the woman was 100% a witch because, I can tell from looking at her, she's got bad spirits all around her. Some days later, this woman went around introducing herself to the people in town, but Aunt's grandma, as well as her friends, church grandmas, refused to open the door at all. She said she doesn't know how many times the woman kept going to their houses and knocking over and over, even left a note saying she just wanted to talk, which Aunt's grandma burnt immediately, as well as dousing the front door in holy water every day. Days later, they find the guy's head sitting on a bench in the middle of the town square, way skinnier than the last time anyone's seen him, and police rushes to the farm, outside of town like 30-minute drive, only to find all the crops withered, all the chickens and roosters are dead. The 2 horses had their heads cut off, and the inside of the house smelled strongly like sulfur. All the cops ran out and didn't investigate further. The area was blocked off, and even priests refused to go there. My aunt heard the rest of his body parts would sporadically show up in different spots, smelling like sulfur, and every time the priests would purify the area for hours, but she doesn't remember seeing that. Personal experiences time. Uncle's Town again. There's this long road leading into the town that's got nothing but sand to the sides, and apparently some gang used to bury the bodies there in the middle of the night, since it's too much land to check. Usual ghost stories about how their spirits would stand in the road asking people for help, but he didn't really believe it. I only heard about this much later, and it's not quite right. Several times when we were heading there, I could swear I saw people sitting off to the side of the road. I never thought about it as a kid, but after hearing that, it spooked the shit out of me. Town my mom was in for college. Nice place, but for some reason all the buses would only go to this road until 9 p.m. The Gov statement was that the crime level was high and it would be dangerous for drivers and passengers to be there that late. But every single bus driver she asked about said it was bullshit. They claimed one part of the road was cursed and driving there at night would 100% lead to an accident, since that's when the ghosts are out. Some mentioned knowing older drivers that disregarded it, and in a matter of minutes they lose control of their body and steer the bus towards the same wall. It's not a driving mistake. The road is very lit up, they just instinctively turn to slam it into the same wall every time. There's a ton of ghost stories and haunt theories about what the hell is up with that, since it never happens in the morning or afternoon, just at night. Even the people who live there don't know what's up with it. They avoid driving there too. They changed it to being a brick road, put triple the amount of street lights, and everyone who drives there is compelled to ram the car against the wall at night without fail. We stayed there like 4 years ago and that law was still in place, and everyone still didn't have any answer, other than some tourist ignored it and died the same way. I just got back from dinner and just asked my mom if she remembered any other urban legends, and she mentioned there's a tree in her hometown where a moderately famous author from like 1920 or something would go to for inspiration, and he hung himself on a branch of it after it got published. It's referred to as the Devil's Tree, where it'll give you something in exchange for your life. 2 other people also hung themselves there on different branches after being successful. One local singer who had 2 hit songs in the 70s and some local actress who had a big breakout after starring in a famous soap opera in the 90s. It's a huge old tree and illegal to take it down, so they just use it as a spooky tourist spot now.
Be me, live in a ghetto near a park. 5 years ago, a girl and her boyfriend murdered the boyfriend's ex in the park, stabbed, beat, and burned alive in the creek that runs through the park. All over the news. Anyways, people are pretty freaked out by the creek now. Kids in the neighborhood keep saying that there's a woman in the creek who tells them she's hurt and to go get help. When they come back with someone, the woman is gone, no trace. Kids make an urban legend, say that if you go to the park at midnight and sit by a creek, the woman will appear and scare you. Bored, about 3 years after the murder, drinking with friends one night at a park. Decide to go to the creek and hang around. Ghosts aren't real. Suddenly, all of us feel sick and heavy, hard to stand, feel dizzy. We stumble back up thinking maybe a gas leak or some poison in the air, who knows? Hear a very loud scream come from the creek once we're above. Run and look down into the creek. Shine phone flashlights. Nothing. Shit bricks collectively, run home. Looking back on it now, probably a crackhead who screamed that night, but spooky nonetheless. Also, pretty cool to think that urban legends are still being made. It's a human trait to make ghost stories, I guess.
Alright, so here's a local legend called the Devil's Church from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Varies from early 1900s to the 1960s. People from this tiny community on the outskirts of Cruces go to this tiny church every Sunday. One Sunday, people are trying to go to church, but the doors are locked so no one can get in. Everyone's like, WTF. They see shadows moving inside, but the windows aren't big enough to really tell what's going on inside. Eventually, the Cruces police show up and open the doors. The shadows that were moving are actually the pastor who hung himself. Swinging side to side, everyone flips a shit. They find sacrificed animals in the church basement. A letter to Satan where the pastor handed his soul over. Pentagram painted in blood on the altar. Cuts on dead pastor's fingertips indicate that's his blood. Church is temporarily closed but reopens a few months later with a new pastor. During church service, the lights go out unexpectedly. Bibles fly out of bookshelves hitting people. People hear an heroed pastor's voice during service. Eventually, the church shuts down. People say at night you can see the same shadows of his swinging hung corpse through windows. You can hear voices from outside and pounding on the basement doors. general feeling of unwelcomeness and unease the closer you approach the church. I've personally been to the church at night, and that place is pretty eerie, but I didn't get close enough to look through the windows. People have said that a couple of years ago some local teens broke in, and one committed self-termination some days after because he kept having visions of the church where he was the pastor sacrificing the animals and could hear Satan's voice. One went insane and has been in the Mesilla Valley Hospital, local loony bin, ever since. One apparently ran away the same night after breaking in and has never been seen since. One was possessed and successfully exorcised just a few miles across the border in Mexico but stayed there.
Flagstaff, Arizona. Incredibly paranormal state, very paranormal town. Circa 1890s. Railroad construction going wild, bringing in tons of cash to boom towns popping up along the way. Chinese immigrants to the U.S. make up a good chunk of the workforce. As it's the most available job and nobody else wants to hire them, settlers do not want these guys there. Constantly harassing the Chinese citizens, racially motivated hate crimes, the whole thing. The entire city burns down in 1905, mostly because brainlets had made everything out of dry northern Arizona wood. And lightning tends to do that. Guess who they blame for this? The Chinese. People start getting lynched, chased down, cast off. Drastic measures have to be taken. Chinese working as servants have the idea that all of them should just live in the service tunnels that run beneath town. These tunnels let the servants travel all around town underground. They'd be staying out of the settlers' way but also able to still work the railroads and lumber industries for money. Thousands of Chinese citizens literally move into the ground and begin living in these tunnels which go on for miles. Always adding more, making secret passageways in case they were blamed for something again and needed to hide. Eventually, they become basically catacombs where they smoke opium, gamble, do all kinds of shit in peace. People even buried down there Paris style. I have been in these tunnels and let me tell you, these things are creepy. Doors that lead to who knows where are still locked. Bizarre messages written on walls, stairways that go down even further to places. It's all there.
So the scariest one I remember was probably the Ant-Man. I won't say where I'm from because it's not important, and I come on 4chan to be anonymous. Years ago, a mad scientist lives on the outskirts of town near the woods, because obviously there's a mad scientist. He does all these weird experiments involving lots of animals, but mainly with ants. The story went that nobody really knew where his house was, but sometimes you'd feel bites on your feet, look down and see yourself getting swarmed by ants. That's how you knew you were getting close. Ants were supposed to get bigger and bigger the closer you got. Some stories even say that there would be ants near the house the size of rats. One story says a woman heard her baby crying one night and went into the room to find these rat-sized ants trying to drag her baby away. My favorite one was about a giant ant he made that lives underground. Whenever we'd see birds flying away from something in the woods, my brother would tell me it was the giant ant walking around. Anyway, one day some kids go looking for his house and actually find it. It looks abandoned, but it's definitely his cause. It's filled with old lab equipment. As they make their way around, they eventually find a bedroom. There's a bed covered in ants with somebody sleeping under it. One boy goes to pull back the sheets to see if it's the scientist, pulls back the blanket, and sees a man's body with a giant black ant's head. Body is humanoid, but with a type of carapace instead of skin. Black and hard, like armor, with little spiky claws for fingers. Boys freak out and run home. Tell parents, but nobody believes them. They each go to bed that night, but one by one, they wake up because they can feel things crawling over their bodies. They rip off their blankets to see themselves covered in millions of ants. They look up just in time to see the silhouette of a giant ant with a human body and huge glistening pincers crawling on their ceiling before it skitters down the wall and attacks them. This last part was normally accompanied by the storyteller jumping and grabbing one of us to see if we would scream.
I lived in a town in Ireland called Tipperary. When I lived there, I kept hearing about a guy called Tomas. People told me he was a serial Christian and a Minecraft YouTuber. I never saw him, neither any one of my friends, but one time during Halloween we had a party out in Bonsha. We all got really drunk and ditched. We decided that we should check out this house that was abandoned for a couple of years, so we go into the place and it's a shithole. We checked the whole house, but nothing was there, but the attic was open, so being drunk and everyone else was a wuss. I decided to go up. After my friend boosted me up, I grabbed his phone to use as a flashlight, and I fucking swear the first thing I see is a guy's face staring right at me. He was bald, clean-shaven, and looked like shit. Anyway, we ran away, and the only person we could think of who would live there was Tomas. We called the cops afterwards, but no one was there. Scared the shit out of me.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.